Okay, hello and welcome to the MSDynamicsWorld.com Fall Manufacturing Webcast Series. I'm Jason Gumpert from MSDynamicsWorld.com, and I am really happy to have you all here with us today for this event. Also, I am extremely happy to be joined by Cindy Jutras, a veteran ERP analyst who runs the research firm Mint Jutras. Cindy is also a returning speaker for us, having shared past research findings as well, and we are really pleased to have her back today. We invite you to add your feedback and ask questions throughout Cindy's presentation. There are a couple ways you can do this. First, you can use the Q&A tab to the right of the slide, to the right of the screen there, to enter your questions and thoughts. We are also using the hashtag MSDWMFG to take your questions and comments, so we'll be sure to leave some time at the end. So, without further delay, please allow me to welcome Cindy Jutras.
Thanks, Jason. And let me just make sure I'm sharing my desktop. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my desktop and we'll get right going. As you can see, our topic today is it time to purchase ERP, and I've got a little hint there. I'm warning you that I don't think it's brain surgery, so please don't wait until your patient is dying. You will see today that I'll be using some data that I collected through a very comprehensive ERP survey. Some of you may have participated in it because Dynamics World community actually participated quite strongly last year. Getting ready to launch a similar survey this year, and hopefully you'll do the same this year. From that survey, we found that 62%, or almost 2 out of 3 businesses, are running the first ERP solution that they ever implemented in the company. Why is that? Because for years now, most people do equate ERP to brain surgery, and their philosophy is you don't do it unless the patient is dying. Now, in spite of that, we did have 38% of our survey respondents that had replaced an ERP solution at least once. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they switched solution providers. 2 out of 3 did, but sometimes they simply either went to a newer solution that was a brand new technology, or perhaps as a result of merger and acquisition or whatever, but they may not have replaced their ERP. The others that had never replaced an ERP solution may in fact have replaced something, though, that wasn't ERP. It might have been a homegrown solution, or it might have been another commercial application that just maybe couldn't qualify as ERP. Maybe it was just accounting applications. I view ERP as an integrated suite of modules that forms the system of record of your business, so maybe it was something less than that that wasn't a full ERP. But in any case, I would like you to think of the possibility, or consider the possibility of a different analogy. And let me pose the question to you. When do you replace a knee or a hip? You replace it when either the pain becomes too intense, or it prevents you from doing what you need to do or what you want to do, so you can't function that well. Now, depending on what you want to do may determine how much of an impact that has. If you're this guy, then as soon as that pain becomes too intense, or he can't get down the hill as well, then he's going to consider that replacement because of the level of performance that he's expecting. Maybe not with this guy. You know, his knee doesn't have to do all that much on the couch, So maybe he's going to put it off and may never get around to that knee or a hip replacement. Of course, this one in the picture is so young, I doubt he'd need one, particularly if he hasn't been using it that much. But still, you get the point. So apply that same philosophy to replacing an ERP solution. You do it when the pain becomes too intense, or when you can't function well, or you can't accomplish what you need to accomplish. Now, that too is going to depend on what you have for plans for your business. If you're not operating all that well, but you don't intend to grow, or you're happy with your performance, then maybe you'll put up with the pain. Maybe it doesn't matter if you can't function at top performance. But quite frankly, I don't know of too many companies that either don't plan to grow or don't need or want to improve their performance. So we asked the question of that 38% that had actually replaced an ERP. We asked them what prompted you to replace an ERP. As you can see, it was pretty dominant. 3 out of 4 of them said they needed more functionality than it was available and what they had at the time. And 2/3 of them wanted to replace outdated technology, either because it was limiting them in what they could do in terms of interoperability, or perhaps that was limiting them in terms of adding new functionality. And in many cases, they couldn't scale with growth. Now, there were other reasons that were listed, but those were the top 3. We also asked the same question of anyone that had an ERP system, asking them what would prompt them to replace ERP. And as you can see, functionality and outdated technology were still the top 2, but not quite as dominant. And a couple of others emerged. The lack of, or the inability to grow was less important, although it appeared as an answer. But another couple that you might want to consider, one was lower total cost of ownership. Even though they had to spend money to either buy a new ERP or the effort to upgrade to a new ERP that may have been provided by their own ERP solution provider, they felt that overall they could lower their total cost of ownership, whether that meant it was easier to maintain, it was easier to get more functionality without having to develop it or search for it themselves. And then merger and acquisition was another factor. You'll see some statistics as we move on in terms of how that impacts some of the decisions that are made. So I'll hold that thought for now, but oftentimes either acquiring a company that either didn't have any ERP or one that did have an ERP, yet they wanted to standardize on the acquiring company's ERP might have prompted those kinds of replacements as well. So one of the questions we asked was whether they had planned a purchase within the next 3 years. 1 out of 4, so 25%, were already planning that purchase. Another 1 in 4 were undecided. 2 out of 4, or half of the survey population, had no intentions whatsoever of purchasing a new ERP within the next 3 years. That may or may not be a good decision, and you'll see as we move forward that some of those that weren't planning, maybe they should be planning. Now, if you analyze the 25% that were planning, then 3 out of 5 of those were going to be replacements, and 2 out of 5 would be brand new first-time purchases, either for the entire enterprise, in other words, they had no ERP today, or they were purchasing it for a new site. Now, if it's a first purchase for the entire company, one of the things that you might be wondering is, what are they running today? Now, we did have a lot of smaller companies take the survey, but quite frankly, not all small companies are in this boat. Smaller companies may still be running on desktop applications. God forbid they're still doing manual processes and spreadsheets, but some just had accounting applications. They might have had a legacy application or multiple disparate applications that weren't that integrated suite that we define as ERP. Now, a few, not very many, were using something else but feeding a corporate ERP. So as you can see, these are replacing other things besides ERP and represent a brand new purchase. Now, for those that have no ERP today, oftentimes there's a question in their mind as to what they should be investing in. When you're very, very small, you're going to spend all the money that's discretionary income or that's extra or that you've borrowed to actually provide an operational foundation that helps you grow the business. So if you're a startup manufacturing company, you're going to spend that money on a new machine that's going to help you produce something as opposed to an ERP. But pretty soon, you reach a certain point where one of these other factors might sound familiar. You may not be in control anymore. You want to grow, but you don't know where you should be expanding. Where is business going to be more profitable? Where are you expanding today? Is it in the Southwest in a certain product line or industry, or is it in the Northeast in a new product? Sometimes it's because you can't meet demand. You've got lots of inventory, but somehow it's never the right inventory so that you can't deliver on time or as requested by your customer. Cash may be tight. There was a time when the only people that could get credit were the people that didn't need credit. And things have definitely improved, but cash and managing cash is always important. Some people say, well, you know, I want to do this, but I don't have any IT staff. Well, I'll tell you, you may not need IT staff to move forward, and you'll see why in a few minutes. Now, the downside of having no ERP or a poorly performing ERP is that you may have difficulty in managing your margins and your profitability. So you're growing, but your profits aren't growing. So why is that? You may need more need for interoperability with your customers and your suppliers. In the past, it was fine just to produce a good product, have good delivery, good quality. Today, customers are requiring more communication and more interoperability. And that's the same for supply chain as well. You may be managing more complexity. Days gone by, it took a big company to be multinational or to trade internationally, but that's no longer the case. So that introduces a whole level of complexity that you may be introducing at a time when you're still growing or you're still a small company. And without the proper support and technology, it's tough to achieve a competitive advantage today. So, you know, you might feel like, well, these are all problems, but what if you can't afford it? Well, this is sort of an aside, but, and quite frankly, it's going to be a very brief aside. I could spend the whole hour talking about different deployment options or software as a service versus hosted versus SaaS versus traditional on-premise. But one thing that's important to note here is that world-class, and I'll describe world-class later on in the presentation, world-class ERP implementations in manufacturers lean much more towards cloud deployments than they do on-premise deployments. So think about that as an option. It requires less upfront cash and may address that issue of not being able to afford it. You'll still have to weigh the pros and cons of a SaaS deployment, but many see on the plus side reduced total cost of ownership, reduced startup costs, it reduces the cost and effort of upgrades, requires less, maybe no IT staff, but if you're thinking, oh, I already have IT staff, don't think that's a reason not to go with SaaS. Many keep that IT staff but want them to do more things that are strategic to the business as opposed to the care and feeding of the hardware and the infrastructure. It may be a way of getting more leading-edge technology, more enhancements through more frequent updates. It could just be a question of treating it as an operating expense versus a capital expense. And if you're growing, if you have remote employees or if you have remote operations, this could be a better way of easing them into remote access or bringing up remote sites. Now, some still have security concerns, but I would argue that everyone should be concerned about security, whether you're running your own on-premise solution or whether you're running it SaaS. And if you're a small manufacturer, then chances are you don't have a lot of IT security experts on board. So who would you rather have run your solution? Someone who makes a living at that, or you who make a living at manufacturing product and delivering it? A lot of people fear escalating costs because it's sort of a rent versus buy thing, and there's no rent control today. So they fear once they get into it, those costs are going to escalate, or they worry about downtime because you're subject to the Internet and you're subject possibly to outages. Those two are easily addressed by service level agreements, though. And a good SaaS provider will already build those kind of guarantees into their service level agreements, but if they're not there, you can negotiate them in. So you can get a guarantee of uptime. You can get a guarantee of a cost escalation cap. Many fear the loss of control. And if that's truly an issue with you, probably nothing I'm going to say is going to change your mind. But I would argue that you probably are losing less control than you think you are. Even if you're not controlling when you're getting the upgrade, you're probably controlling when you take advantage of the new features and functionality in that upgrade. So weigh those pros and cons. Again, I could talk for an hour on this. So let's go back to the main topic here. Let's talk a little about the first purchases for a new site. Oftentimes this is because of geographic expansion. And, for example, in these areas, like in the BRIC countries, Brazil, some of the emerging Eastern European companies, China, India, in those kind of companies, you may or may not have the feet on the ground and the level of expertise to get that up and running. So a SaaS deployment could actually be an alternative, but this actually is prompting the new purchase. Another reason to prompt the new purchase is expansion. Say you're a U.S.-based company and you're expanding within the U.S., or you're acquiring a new company within the U.S. that may or may not have an ERP solution already. Even if they do have it, you might want to impose your standards on them and get them all working off the same page. Now, this kind of scenario is not just for something that big companies face. In fact, if you're running only a single operating location that would be served by ERP, you're in the minority. 67% of our survey respondents have more than one operating location that they need to serve, that ERP needs to serve. And in fact, if you look down below, you'll see small, lower mid, upper mid, and large companies. That's based on annual revenues. So small companies are those with annual revenues under $25 million, but you see even they have, on average, 2.5 operating locations. The lower mid-market goes from $25 million to $250 million, and that grows to 5.5 locations. Upper mid-market is $250 million to $1 billion. You're getting up into 9.4, and over $1 billion, you're at 10.7. So as you can see, the number of different operating locations grows with time, and it grows with revenues, so as you grow, this will become more and more of an issue and may cause you to add either a new site to your existing ERP location or a new ERP for that site. Now, if you're actually making this first investment, you're going to have to justify that investment. As you can see, we've collected data on when the ROI was projected to be reached and when it was actually reached. Now, we had 27% of the population that were very aggressive and thought they were going to get that ROI within the first year. That proved to be a little too aggressive because we had nobody that actually realized 100% payback on their investment within that first year. Part of the reason is, on average, it takes about 8 months to get to the first go-live milestone. So until you go live, it's very difficult to achieve that ROI. And if you're chewing up 8 months of the first year, it doesn't leave you a lot of time to recoup that. But you'll notice that many actually recoup it within the first year, 1 to 2 years. 46% actually recoup that investment in 1 to 2 years. And if you add the 46 and the 30%, you'll see that 3/4 of our surveyed actually recouped that within 3 years. So it's a pretty reasonable return on such an investment. Now, you've already heard me mention world-class, and you'll see me mention it more in terms of justifying the expense, because how you justify it really is in projecting a lot of savings. And I'm going to be showing you the difference in savings between world-class and all others. So world-class refers to the ERP implementation. It may or may not translate to a world-class company, but we oftentimes see very high performance of companies that have world-class ERP implementations also are very high-performing companies in terms of growth and profitability and however else you determine a world-class company. We use quite a complicated composite metric so that we can simplify the results for you. The composite metric is made up of actual results measured since implementation. You notice I didn't say as a result of the implementation. While I'd like to measure results as a result of the implementation, that's really not fair to the survey respondent because it's very difficult to say. The results that you get will be a combination of people, processes, and technology all combined. That's how you explain the fact that people running the exact same software sometimes get very different results. So it's also easier to say, here's the stake in the ground of when I implemented my current ERP, and now what are the results I've measured since then. I also measure progress made in achieving what would be company-specific goals, and I give them a long list of potential goals for ERP, and not all of them actually had each of those goals, but the more goals they had and the more progress they made against those goals, the higher the likelihood that they were top-performing ERP implementation. And I also temper that with current performance, because if you were operating very, very poorly, it's like low-hanging fruit. It's easy to get some early gains, but if you haven't gotten into good performance yet, I can't really call you a world-class ERP implementation. So I use those three and turn that into a composite metric, and the top 15% were those that were determined to be world-class. And what you'll see in these are world-class ERP implementations in manufacturing companies. For manufacturing companies, I add some additional metrics that I would not include if you were not a manufacturing company. And you'll see what those are in a second. In fact, here they are. Some of those results that we're measuring are reduction in operating costs, reduction in administrative costs, which any kind of company can realize. But manufacturing and distribution companies can also achieve results in reducing inventory costs and reducing obsolete inventory. Now, a couple things to point out here. First of all, look at the vast difference between a world-class implementation and all others. Sometimes a 2-3 times multiplier. So that top 15% really have made those ERP implementations really produce results for them. But even the 85% achieve quite significant results. Think about what your current inventory costs are. What if you could reduce the cost by 7%? How much of that would go toward, that's a lot that would go towards the purchase of a new ERP or an upgrade to an improved ERP implementation. Obsolete inventory isn't worth anything to anyone except maybe in salvage value. So reducing that down to 0 would be optimal. Even non-world-class ERP implementations reduce that on average by 8%. Some other improvements, increase in profitability over the past fiscal year. That is the only metric, the only improvement that we measure not since ERP implementation. And the reason we do that is because some of these implementations are 20 years old, some of them are 1 year old, some of them are 6 months old, some of them are 5 years old. That will span any number of different economic recessions and recoveries. And profitability can be impacted by the economy. So we sort of normalize it by saying what was the profitability increase over the past fiscal year. The others are based on since implementation. It could be improvement in complete and on-time delivery, the reduction in cycle time, as well as an increase in total production volume. As you can see, some of those don't have quite the same level of difference between world-class and all others, but these are all very significant kind of improvements that you can hang your hat on and use to justify that investment. So world-class has resulted in bigger and better results. So you have to ask the question, what do they do differently than others? Well, one of the things they do is they use more of ERP. Now, this is something that I've been analyzing for the past almost 7 years. For the first 5 years, I worked for another analyst firm for the Aberdeen Group, and I had a certain methodology that I used, which was based on a preset of modules. And I also asked another question that said, what % of the functionality that's available in those modules are you actually using? And then I used a product of those to get a percentage use. Over time, I wanted to increase the number of modules because the footprint has expanded. And I also realized that second element, the % of functionality that's used, was quite subjective. And I also realized that many companies, many users, didn't even understand what they had in terms of functionality. They may have thought they were using everything, but then they would ask for a feature or function that, quite frankly, already existed. So I knew that that was a little subjective. I changed this up last year. I actually presented a list of modules, and for manufacturers, it was 34 modules. I asked them whether they were fully or partially implemented, and I also allowed them to check some of those modules off by saying they weren't relevant to their business. So, for example, general ledger, accounts payable, accounts receivable, inventory control for a manufacturer are always, if you don't think you need those, then you don't understand enterprise applications or ERP. But you may not need a product configurator. You may not need aftermarket service. You may not need a project management solution. So I allowed them to check those off as not relevant. The scaled usage is a scale on a scale of 0 to 100. Getting 100 points means you have fully implemented every module that is relevant to your business. So as you can see, world class scaled usage is 78, where it's only just under 64 for all others. Couple of other points. World Class use more modules. They also fully implement more of the modules that they have purchased, and they also perceive more modules as being relevant. There are some that for example, if someone tells me that workflow management isn't relevant to their business, I might say to them, really? Maybe you just haven't figured out how best to use it. So that is a bit subjective, and this isn't perfect. No measurement of ERP usage is perfect, but I think this is giving us the best look at things. I'm going to run through fairly quickly the different modules that each manufacturer would be shown. There's several in finance and administration, and obviously some of these are very relevant to everyone. But for example, some may not need the treasury management function. Some may not need job or project costing, so I'll give them that. But you'll see quite a difference in terms of implementation of World Class versus all others. In terms of operations and logistics, again, you see quite a difference between World Class and all others. And many of these, you'll see the biggest difference, I think, in the planning functions: master production schedule, material requirements planning, capacity requirements planning, and distribution requirements planning. Less of a difference in shop floor control because most manufacturers actually perceive the need there, and ERP is the most cost-effective way of handling those needs. And you can see some of the other modules here. Order management and customer service, there's one anomaly there where World Class is no more likely, in fact a little less likely to implement than all others, and that's in order management. And quite frankly, I don't have a good explanation for that, except in that perhaps they're using something else as opposed to their ERP, and then interfacing it in. That's sort of a mystery to me. Obviously, the percentages are still pretty high. And then finally, the supporting technology, and here's where there are some dramatic differences. There were areas where companies, particularly all others, would say these were not relevant to their business, and yet I think that would probably indicate that they didn't understand what these were for. Process modeling, to actually model your business and use that as an input to workflow, for example. A lot of all others really miss the importance of that. Event management sometimes draws a blank look and people don't understand what it is. Think of it as alerts and notifications, letting you know when something happens or when something that was scheduled to happen doesn't happen. These are all supporting technology that were never available in legacy applications, but are generally available in any new or modern technology. And if you're not using them, you probably want to consider looking into it. Now, ERP is likely not to be the only application that you have. And in fact, we put a list of, you'll see two lists here. These are extensions, separate applications that may surround ERP. And these are extensions that might be applicable to virtually any company, whether it's CRM or contact center or document management or BI or financial planning and budgeting. Then there's these which are more related to ERP for manufacturing, extending ERP for manufacturing. In general, you can see, and I can go back one, oops. Let me go back. You can see the difference. Not only are world-class ERP implementations using more of ERP, but they're also using more of other applications as well. So the difference between them are quite significant. You'll also notice that some of these may look familiar. You may have seen them on those module lists, and that's true. In many cases, a manufacturer is going to have a choice between whether they use the module in ERP or whether they use a separate application to satisfy that need. In the past, it was always a trade-off between level of integration and what you might call best-of-breed functionality, because modules in ERP used to be a lot lighter in terms of functionality than these best-of-breed applications. That's not necessarily the case anymore. Yes, they are more deeply integrated, but they may have comparable functionality. And in fact, we've got a few I've selected here: warehouse management, EAM, supply collaboration and scheduling, supply chain planning, field service and project management, that may be either an extension or a module. And those shaded in green, you'll notice if you add those up, 49 and 86 is more than 100. In fact, 34 and 77 is one more than 100, but I think that's a rounding issue. All those others indicate that these world-class companies are using functions that are within the modules of their ERP solution, and they're also extending them with applications. It's not necessarily an either-or, but it could be both. All others tend to use either-or. There are no instances there where the percentage goes over 100%. Now, I can't guarantee that no individual all other ERP user isn't using both, but in the aggregate, that's not the case. So world-class implementations continue to seek more and more functionality to meet a fuller breadth of need. Another example of a difference between world-class and all others is in how well they keep up with the release process of their vendor. You'll notice that world-class are far more likely, about a third more likely, 45 versus 32%, to be operating on the latest release. That means they're taking more advantage of the innovation that they're paying for within maintenance dollars. Some may be one release behind, but it's highly unlikely world-class will be 2 or 3 or more releases behind. Another thing to point out is, look at 26% of world-class are still in the process of implementing. That means they're not done, and yet they have already achieved enough results to put them in the top 15%. So they're obviously going after this very aggressively and producing results before they're even done implementing fully. Now, this might mean they're implemented fully in one site and still rolling it out to other sites, or it might mean that they're just not done and they're continuing to implement more and more ERP functionality. Another thing we looked at is what level of need was met without customization. Now, world-class implementations were 24% less likely to take action by customizing their software, and they actually meet 83% of their requirements versus 78% of all others. Now, that's not a huge difference, but one of the things that you might want to take into account here, if you're running heavily customized software, first of all, it makes it harder for you to keep up with releases, and it may prevent you from taking advantage of new functionality. If those are legacy applications that you could only customize by changing source code or really mucking around in customizations, then you may be missing out on an opportunity with a newer ERP, because newer ERP implementations, newer technology allows you to do an awful lot of what used to be viewed as customization as configurations, tailoring, and personalization. Now, the next slide you're going to see wasn't a result of this ERP study. This was a brand new survey that I just launched last month, which the purpose of it was in understanding perceptions and understanding of software as a service. But the results are relevant here. This pertains to all enterprise applications and not necessarily just ERP. But one of the things I asked, and I will ask this year in the upcoming ERP survey, is what type of customization do you require? You can look down, you know, it might be customer reporting, it might be user-defined fields, it might be personalizing transaction screens for just look and feel, maybe putting a logo on, reassigning where things are or what appears on the screen, you know, creating a dashboard that you can drill down from, predefining and customizing workflows. Chances are, in a modern technology-enabled solution, everything down to custom logic required can be done without customization. Those are configuration tools, those are tailoring, those are personalization, and with a good solution that is technology-enabled, you don't have to touch the source code at all, you don't have to build barriers to upgrades, etc. So just getting this level of configurability, tailorability, and configurability may be enough justification for you to go from an older solution to a newer solution. And I would argue that even some of that custom logic may be, you may be able to implement with configuration, particularly if you're configuring the workflows. So just to wrap up, you can choose your analogy. Whether you view it as brain surgery or joint replacement, you have to understand that when it comes to implementing an ERP, of course, there's no such thing as non-invasive surgery. You do have to go in and look at your processes, look at your data, and make some careful decisions. Now, when you're planning for recovery time for a joint replacement, and you want to minimize that recovery time, what do? You get in better shape. You make sure the muscles around there and your condition is good before you go under the knife and do that replacement surgery. You want to do the same thing here. Whether you've decided to move to a new ERP or not, you want to look at your data. You want to make sure it's scrubbed clean. You want to look at your processes. You want to see if you want to replace those with a new system or whether you want to replace those processes with better practices. The goal is to be alive, thriving, and pain-free. So don't wait until the patient is dying. If you wait until your business is failing because of your ERP or in spite of having ERP and you're under distress, that's not the time to be looking calmly at reevaluating processes and looking at the underlying data. Don't wait until your business is in distress before you have to do something. If you need it but you can't afford it, there's a couple of recommendations I would make. First of all, look at the potential cost savings, and that may alone justify moving forward, even though it's going to take you a couple of years, 1 to 2, maybe 3 years to recoup those costs, because the ROI is there. Also explore SaaS deployment. It reduces the level of capital expenditure up front, so it may not overextend your credit and still support your growth so that you're not hindered and you'll be able to actually better pay for it later through that growth of profitability and revenue. Throughout the whole thing, set those goals and then measure them, and when you reach them, set new goals. Because ERP should be an ongoing source of cost saving and improvement, not just a one-time deal. With that, I will open it up for questions.
All right, great, Cindy, thanks. One question that, and just to remind everyone, you can ask questions in the Q&A block that you see to the right, or in the chat area too, that works. One question that just came in is about your data. Is this this is data from your own sources. Can you talk a little bit more, maybe a background about how you gather this research and present your findings?
Sure. This is an electronic survey. The survey results that you're seeing now included about 900 completed responses. I qualify those responses by their knowledge and involvement with ERP. So the first question I ask is what involvement they have and what knowledge they have. And if they have no knowledge of it, then I say thanks anyway. So that was 900 survey responses. The way I go about gathering those responses is, first of all, I go to a panel company of companies that have said, I am available to take surveys. This is a panel company that has very good reputation and gets very well qualified, manager level and above survey respondents very quickly. So I seed that with, last year it was 200, and I'm probably going to seed it with more this year because I want some very specific industries. So I seed that with 200 responses. Other ways I go about it, for example, the Microsoft Dynamics World community promoted the survey and will again this year and encouraged their community members to take the survey. So Microsoft Dynamics World community and others like them were also participants, as well as some of them, some larger ERP and actually some smaller ERP companies actually sent that out to their installed bases. There were none that captured so many responses that it skewed the results to just their community, and I blend them all together. So, you know, we grew the total response last year to about 900, and we'll probably do that or about 1,000 this year of fairly well qualified companies. The only thing it doesn't get me are people that don't have ERP. So that's one thing I'm willing to do in order to preserve the integrity of the data that I collect about ERP.
Great, and as a related question, kind of a two-part thing. One that came in is do you have the results classified by the software vendor, software manufacturer, in terms of Microsoft versus SAP versus others? And if you have any insight, you know, given that Microsoft is entering into a very serious round of new releases for its ERP products, do you have any reflections on that in particular? So maybe first, whether you break it down.
I do. I ask two questions. I ask, what are all of the ERP solutions that are implemented across their entire enterprise? Because, quite frankly, for anything but a very small company, it's actually unusual today for an enterprise to only have one. However, before I ask all the questions about specific implementations, I ask them to select one of those as the one that they're going to be answering the questions about. About half of them indicate that that is what they would call their primary or standard ERP across the enterprise, and about half say that may not be the case, but this is the one I'm most familiar with. We actually collected responses from about 125 Microsoft Dynamics customers, and that spanned NAV, AX, SL, and GP, with probably the highest concentration in the AX group. So the highest concentration also in manufacturers. So we did get a very good response, and you know, I do have data segregated out by that, which we can use, and I use that to to offer information and some intelligence back to the Dynamics community as well as to Microsoft itself if and when they express interest.
All right. Any particular maybe recommendations or about some of the upcoming Dynamics releases that you think are particularly interesting in terms of maybe the cloud availability or any of the things that Microsoft's doing to maybe compete in the marketplace and hopefully entice its clients to either upgrade or do maybe do a replacement if they're way behind?
Well, I think there's a couple of areas where there have been some significant changes over the last couple of years, and one of them is, as you indicated, Jason, cloud deployments. One of the things I'm finding, and one of the things that prompted me to launch a separate survey on SaaS in particular, was the fact that there seems to be still, while there's a lot more interest in cloud deployments, there's also still a lot of confusion about it. But I think that's one area where the Dynamics community is very anxious to hear and see and evaluate what Microsoft is coming out with. Another is in terms of mobile deployment, and I think there's still a lot of confusion there as well. Everyone is carrying mobile devices today, but a lot of them are missing the opportunity of what that can do for them. For example, when I ask for selection criteria, having mobile access to ERP data doesn't factor very high. And part of the reason is it's the top-level executives that probably really need that access from an intelligence standpoint, and yet those top-level executives aren't necessarily connected to ERP. So I think what's going to happen is that some that are running implementations in the Dynamics community will have to take the initiative and push that out to their executives. And once they do and the executives get wind of and understand what the possibilities are, then pulling that to them is going to accelerate. So it's going to be very important to keep an eye out on anything that's going on in that regard.
All right, great. Well, Cindy, I want to thank you again for taking the time to speak with us today. This session will go on demand, and once again, thanks, and thanks to our audience for attending as well.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Cindy.